Hi everyone, here's what's bothering and terrifying me today. The Biden administration recently released how it's going to classify, in broader terms, a lot more kinds of domestic violent extremists. In other words, terrorists. And some of these make a lot of sense. Some of them are bizarre and troubling, to put it mildly. So as I'll post the link for it in the description down below. But as this document, this unclassified document shows, domestic violent extremists are U.S.-based actors who conduct or threaten activities that are dangerous to human life in violation of the criminal laws of the United States or any state, appearing to be intended to intimidate or coerce the civilian population and influence the policy of a government by intimidation or coercion, or affect the conduct of a government by mass destruction, assassination, or kidnapping, as per the definition of domestic terrorism in 18 Code 2331, Section 5. Okay, as a baseline, that's pretty much what terrorism is, trying to force people to do something else, and you're basically using violence to achieve those means. Okay, I'm with you so far, but here's where it starts to get really weird. So it starts off with racially or ethnically motivated violent extremists. So DVEs, domestic violent extremists, with ideological agendas derived from bias, often related to race or ethnicity, held by the actor against others, including a given population group. Okay, so KKK terrorist designation when? Animal rights / environmental violent extremists, DVEs seeking to end or mitigate perceived cruelty, harm, or exploitation of animals, or perceived exploitation or destruction of natural resources and the environment. So if you have the audacity to protest for better conditions for animals, you might be a domestic terrorist. Do you not like factory farming? You're a terrorist now. Managing to go back to the flip side where, okay, probably a good development, abortion-related violent extremists, DVEs with ideological agendas in support of pro-life or pro-choice beliefs. Oh, wait a second. Okay, so pro-life and, bombing Planned Parenthoods, which are a thing that have happened because America's like that. That is, okay, yeah, that's you really got to crack down on that. How are pro-choice people violent? Are we going to churches and burning them down saying, you must kill the babies? What? It makes no sense whatsoever. Absolutely none. Here's the one that should make all of us, whether we are left or right, very concerned, especially those of us on the left, because we know the people on the right are going to get away with this. But according to this document now, anti-government / anti-authority violent extremists, otherwise known as DVEs with ideological agendas derived from anti-government or anti-authority sentiment, including opposition to perceived economic, social, or racial hierarchies, or perceived government overreach, negligence, or illegitimacy. So there's a lot to unpack there. Hey, are you against authority, especially authority that is brutal and should not have said authority? You're a domestic terrorist now. Hey, do you want to point out that systemic hierarchies can actually be very harmful in terms of patriarchy? And I know the big boogeyman today is critical race theory. So, oh, look, all of a sudden you want to talk about that or support those things. Guess you're a domestic terrorist now. Perceived government overreach. Who gets to decide that? Who decides what is and isn't government overreach? And then how to punish those who are clearly in violation of that perception? The following was clearly made with January 6th in mind. Militia violent extremists, DVEs who take overt steps to violently resist or facilitate the overthrow of the U.S. government in support of their belief that the U.S. government is purposely exceeding its constitutional authority and is trying to establish a totalitarian regime. Oppose many federal and state laws and regulations, particularly those related to firearms ownership. So, okay, to a certain extent, you might think, all right, kind of good. At the same time, hey, if you're believing that the government is becoming totalitarian or exceeding its constitutional authority, you can be declared a domestic violent extremist. Which, again, Who gets to decide that? And who gets to set the bounds for what is and isn't acceptable? This is incredibly dangerous shit. And then my personal fucking favorite. Anarchist violent extremists, DVEs who oppose all forms of capitalism, corporate globalization, and governing institutions which are perceived as harmful to society. Basically, we're all terrorists now. I'm a proud anti-capitalist. You mean terrorist in America? Hey, maybe this whole corporate globalization is really bad for a lot of people and is resulting, as we've seen, in actual child slavery in places like Africa and Asia? Nope. Talking about that, that's just straight up terrorism, man. And again, really want to stress the end part of if you are perceiving these injustices and certain government or corporate institutions as being harmful to society, that is worthy of applying the label of domestic violent extremist to you. Next up, we have the sovereign citizens. So, DVEs who believe they are immune from government authority and laws. Okay, but again, that's like they're nuisances for the most part, not really something worth just putting this much time and effort into. Like, all of this is just so clearly over the top and makes zero sense and holds zero accountability to the government, especially with all this talk of perceived. That is the dirtiest word in all of this. And then just as a catch-all term, because apparently this was not thorough enough, you have all other domestic terrorism threats, DVEs with ideological agendas that are not otherwise defined under one of the other domestic terrorism threat categories, including a combination of personal grievances and beliefs with potential bias related to religion, gender, or sexual orientation. So, if you really want to think about 1984 and, criminal thoughts and things like this and thought crime, this is basically what that is amounting to in a great many ways. If you so much as think the government is overstepping its authority, boom goes the DVE label, which is basically a fancy way of saying domestic terrorist. Hey, do you maybe want to lessen the harm done to the environment and to animals by corporations? Well, nope, you're a terrorist now. Hey, you want to maybe talk about how some of this is overreach? Even just that thought or talking about that. Nope, sorry, you're a domestic violent extremist now. Thinking and talking and saying, hey, maybe we shouldn't do this thing is now considered domestic violent extremism, according to the Biden administration. And again, all these different catch-alls for just anything, everything and anything could be turned into a charge. And when you have a nation like America that profits off of the prison industry and so seeks to rob people of actual democracy, as we've seen in the various Republican legislatures across the United States, and with so much money being hoarded by the wealthy that they can influence municipal and even state and federal politics, this is the clearest grab of corporate and political power and just trying to justify it while making any attempts at saying, hey, maybe you shouldn't do that, and making that a criminal offense, which lands you in jail, which is great for the corporations because they'll just work you for pennies because it's basically just slavery with extra steps in the United States. And then on top of that all, you have the issue where a lot of felons can't vote. And if you are an extremist and you get charged for even having the audacity to critique the US government or a corporation due to perceived injustices, you might go off to jail and you might lose your voting privileges. And the wealthy who keep buying up all the land and all the resources and now have you under the authority of the state in terms of being their ward as you serve as a prisoner is really the final capstone to bring back feudalism. That's what this is. This enables feudalism on a grand scale, and it's going to come Granted, for all of us, but mostly like leftists and progressive firsts, it will eventually get to the other, right-wing nut jobs, as we saw with, the sovereign citizens and those who want to overthrow the government. They're coming for them too. They're coming for all of us, which is why it is, again, really important that we recognize that neither side of the political establishment is on our side. They're on the side of the neoliberal corporate elite, which govern the vast majority, if not the outright entirety, of the West. These are not heroes and leaders. These are villains who yearn for the days when kings had all authority and the serfs had nothing. They want all of us to suffer purely for their own peace of mind. When is enough going to be enough for so many people to finally realize that something needs to happen? Something like a general strike or a peaceful revolution, or, since we still know who our quote unquote elected representatives are, I don't know, go to their offices, their homes, their constituency offices, to Congress, and literally do not let them leave until they prevent this from going through as it currently stands. The power that people have is in our collective power. As individuals, despite, all the talk that America loves about, the rights of the individual and how an individual can succeed, the times when America has succeeded most has been through collective power, people power, if you want to call it that. That is where the power lies, and it's time to use it before we all basically become slaves in a neo-feudalistic society. And the fact that more people aren't realizing this or talking about this or holding the politicians and government and those who write the laws to account and literally protesting outside their homes and their offices and preventing them from having a moments of peace while they threaten us with actual violence is definitely what's bothering me today.